The way to get inclusive outcomes, that diversity of thought that you are speaking of, is to intentionally design for it. Be very strategic about how am I going to do that and get that.
Welcome to the Modern Selling Podcast, where we help the entire sales community to create more sales conversations with today's modern buyer. This includes anyone from entrepreneurs and business owners to sales reps and sales leaders. Each episode, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you find, engage, connect, and nurture your relationships with your buyers. I'm Mario Martinez Jr., your host, and you're now listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. This episode is sponsored by Zant, the enterprise leader in sales engagement. Zant has authored the definitive guide to sales cadence. Get your copy at salescadenceguide.com. That's salescadenceguide.com. Hey y'all, Mario Martinez Jr. here. I'm excited to be with you guys. I've got my friend, Sara Jones, CEO of InclusionPro, and we are live actually for the second time. Yes, I think I'm starting a trend here, Sara. Last week, we went live for the first time live on Facebook for the Modern Selling Podcast, and you are literally the second guest in history. And for all of you listening, I'm excited to have you guys. We're live on Facebook, and this will also be published to the Modern Selling Podcast. So I want to welcome, first of all, my very special guest, and it is Sara Jones. She is the CEO of InclusionPro and the co-founder of the Women Tech Council. And you are actually out in Salt Lake City, Utah, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Here in Salt Lake, it's beautiful weather, so come and visit when coronavirus is over. We want you all here in the summer, the fall, and also for skiing.
That's right. Great slopes there. They call it the Silicon Slopes over there, right? It's like
That's
the
right.
Silicon Valley over there. Now, Sara, I actually saw you speak live when we were sharing the stage, actually not at the same time, but right after each other. You were at the Next 2020 conference by Zant, which is also sponsor of this podcast as well. And you had such an amazing story. I got to tell you, I think I told you when I was in person. I think I told you this. I was in tears. I was crying, and I was probably the only guy there amongst my 10 foot by 10 foot radius, and just wiping the nose and all that good stuff. It was such a great story, and it was so powerful and impactful. And so you were recently a speaker there. Before I get into that and the topic about the whole story with reuniting with your family in South Korea, do me a favor, tell us a little bit about your background. And then I have a very special question that I ask all my guests after you tell us about your background. So tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. Mario, just so you know, you were not the only man that cried. I have been known to make lots of grown men cry by telling the story. I think they just tend to cry a little bit more in private.
There you go.
Kind of holding those emotions. Is it okay to cry in front of other people? But thank you so much for having me on your show. I love technology. So I love that you're really pushing the envelope in so many ways, making this live as a podcast and just grabbing content in so many ways. I have been in technology and innovation for over 20 years. I actually started my career as a patent attorney, spent about 10 years doing that, became partner at a law firm, and then I totally switched careers and went into tech startups. So I did video, content production, business development, sales. I've done it all. I was also a CEO of a tech company. So I've really run the gamut of the roles that you can have in a tech company. And close to my heart, along the entire way, diversity and inclusion has been a critical part of my experience, my personal experience, especially where I have tended to have roles in very male-dominated fields. In patent law, I was one of the very few women in Salt Lake City practicing patent law, if you can imagine 20 years ago what that might have been like. Even in my roles in tech leadership, doing sales, doing strategy, I had tended to work with mostly men in my career. And so that's one of the big reasons I started Women Tech Council 13 years ago, was to help change the conversation, change the cultures and the pipeline that we're creating into our technology companies. And that's pretty broad. STEM is a really critical part of that. I actually have a chemical engineering degree, chose to get a law degree on top of that. So that's what prepared me to practice patent law. So I have done the STEM pathway, spent a lot of time thinking about innovation. But as you know, in tech sales, there's certain roles where women tend to not be well represented. And then once you add on, racial, ethnicities, LGBTQ, a lot of other areas of diversity, it gets very, very small for certain groups. So that's been a subject close to my heart that I've always tried to integrate into my practice as a leader. And now I get to consult and work with leaders from a consultative perspective through InclusionPro, and being able to, speak, sometimes talking about my personal journey along the way. I get to do that. I feel very fortunate. But usually when I'm keynoting, I'm typically teaching leadership skills and principles.
I love it. And this is such an important topic in terms of diversity and inclusion. We talk about it. Companies even have diversity and inclusion executive vice presidents and, leaders, and a individual that has a department of like 3.
Yeah.
Inside of an organization. And I'm being cheeky for those of you that are watching live, and those of you listening in on the podcast. I'm being quite cheeky on this particular subject, but this is an extremely important topic to spend time talking about, because there's merit and there's value in creating a diversified organization, not just in culture and background, but a diversity of thought. And I have some really strong opinions, and what we've done here at Vengreso has been nothing short of what I would call amazing, and some of the goals. And, our leadership team has been 100% supportive of the direction that we wanted to go and we wanted to take. And so before we drill into that, because you're actually, the basis of your story was a pretty awesome one that you talked about in terms of being reunited with your family as someone who's Korean. And oh, by the way, I don't know if I told you this, but my wife, she's half Black, half Korean. And my mother-in-law, she is full Korean. She speaks, reads, writes, all in Korean. She's very Korean. And so my children are, of course, Mexican, Filipino, Caucasian, Black, and Korean. So I've got a very diversified organization here at my own home. So seeing so cool. You and watching the whole Korea story and the reunited of your family, I was like, oh, it was just so special to me. So, but let me ask you this question here, Sara, first. And that is the very special question I ask all my guests. And that is, tell us something nobody would know about you, even if they were to look at your social profiles. And I've had really cool things from, they had an extra appendage, all the way down to, I've got 2 kids and a dog. So, you can find whatever you want in between. Oh, and also someone confessed on running a poker ring, an illegal poker ring during college, and that's how they paid for their college.
Okay, well.
So give it to us, my friend. Give it to us.
That cool. All right. Well, a few of my close friends do know this, but I actually played the accordion for 8 years.
Wow.
When I was younger. Yeah, from ages, when I believe from like 8 to 14 or 15-ish. So, and back in the day, they used to have all of these competitions like in California. And I even went on a cruise once when I was 14, and I was part of a band of accordion players. And so you would either compete individually or like duets, or even a full orchestra. So one year we did the 1812 overture, all accordions.
Wow.
And we won the whole competition, by the way. But it's really amazing what you can do with that instrument. I quit to become a cheerleader, right? Because I was like, oh, accordion's not cool. I want to be cool. I want to be a cheerleader. Yeah. So that's something that I think surprises a lot of people. That's my musical training, was learning how to play the accordion.
Do you still play it now?
I don't. No, I actually have a grand piano now that I could, because my hands are so small that the accordion actually is a really great instrument because the keys are closer together. But I always, secretly wanted to be a pianist. Unfortunately, if you've been an accordionist, what you know is that the right hand from the keyboard is the same as a piano, but your left hand does buttons, which are ordered very differently. And so your muscle development on your left hand does not completely translate to piano.
Oh.
So that's the skill that you have to learn, is how to develop your left hand more to be a good pianist. I actually never took lessons to play the piano. I'm just self-taught there.
A woman of many traits and secrets.
Yes.
I like it. So first off, you blow me away with all the degrees. And then now you add on the accordion and the piano and everything.
Yeah.
It's too much. It's too much. I'm just trying to cope with playing. Yesterday, I was out playing Jedi swords with my two boys. One's 6 and
May
one's
the
9.
4th.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're going around and we're having all this imagination. And the thing that I love the most is every 10 words is pretend this, pretend that. So now I'm into pretend this, and then I did this and pretend. And so we that's all I have time to focus on right now. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about the story that you talked about, which was the reuniting with your birth family from South Korea. Tell us a little bit about that. And then I want to move into some of the lessons that people can learn around hearing your story around this diversity and inclusion. So we'll stop there. I mean, we'll start there and I'll ask some questions in between.
Well, thank you. I'm middle-aged, right? And I think, growing up as an adoptee in Salt Lake City, Utah, particularly, one of the questions you get asked all the time is, are you going to find your birth family? It seems to be this expectation that people have of children who are adopted, particularly people who are adopted from a different race, where it's very obvious that you were adopted into a family and your parents are white and you just look so different. And for most of my career, I didn't, or my life, I would say, I didn't really feel a super strong desire to find my birth family. I think I personally needed time to process and really get to that place where that's something that I wanted for myself personally. And I do want to be really clear that not every adoptee is going to want the same thing. And so one of the things hopefully people can learn as they hear my story is that's great. That's Sarah's personal journey, but that doesn't mean I'm going to run up to my adoptee friend and be like, oh my gosh, of course you're going to want to find your birth family, right? So just kind of knowing that it's a very personal experience, that adoption is a lifelong experience, and that it can happen when you're young, or it may never happen, and that is fine. So just know that I never judge anyone who has no wish or desire to find their birth family. It just so happens in my case that I got to a point where I thought, okay, I think I'm ready for it. Because what happens is when you choose to find your birth family, you also sort of understand that there could be a lot of unknowns out there. One, that you may never find them. So there could be immense disappointment, right, for years once you've made that mental decision. And then secondly, there's just a lot of really hard situations and stories. Because back in the 70s when I was adopted, it was completely closed. People were adopted out for so many reasons, but Korean adoptees never knew what that reason really was.
Sure.
And all we knew is that there was hundreds of thousands of us that were adopted out of Korea, right? So I actually have a tattoo on my arm. Maybe that's the thing I should have said at the very beginning, that looking at me, this polished presentation, tattoos were not cool in the 1970s, right? But they're cool now. So I guess if I said I had a tattoo, people would say, that's old news, right?
Yeah. No big deal.
No big deal. But I actually came to America with a tattoo on my arm.
And how old were you then?
I was 3 years old.
3.
So a child with a tattoo was very unusual, right? I mean, even now, I don't think people are tattooing their children.
I think that would be considered probably abuse.
Probably, right?
Yeah, in certain cultures, certain areas like the United States,
right.
for sure.
And even in Korea, it was very unusual, right? So I'm actually in a database of Korean adoptees who were trying to find their families. So there's about 8,000 profiles. Mine's the only one that has the keyword tattoo in it.
Wow.
So it was very, very rare. Now, my tattoo is really large. It was on my left forearm, and it was the sign of what we thought growing up was a cross or an X, and then underneath it was 4 dots. And I never knew what it meant growing up. I just had this tattoo, and my parents were LDS, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So growing up Mormon, again, another taboo, they didn't really want people putting marks on their bodies. So my parents felt like it'd be best if they removed the tattoo so that I wouldn't, as a child, have the experience of being, bullied by other kids or just made fun of, right?
Yeah, right.
And so back then, if you think about how you would remove tattoos, it was by laser surgery, or plastic surgery. They didn't have laser surgery like they did now. So it was an actual surgery to have it removed.
Right.
So it's basically just a light scar on my arm. Kind of you forget that it's there for most of your life. And, you think about it once in a while, but I always knew that it was something very unique and special because I had talked to lots of other adoptees and never found anyone with a tattoo that large on their bodies. So when it came to the time when I felt like I was ready to find my birth family, I took a permanent mark and I drew over the tattoo and I started posting it like in that database I was telling you about. And then I
Right.
started sharing it on Facebook because by then Korea had about 70 million users on Facebook. And I, was in technology and I thought, well, I'm over here in the US, short of literally flying over to Korea. How can I get the word out to Korean people where I don't speak Korean? So, my Korean network was very, very small.
Small.
So started sharing the photo around, and I was very fortunate that there was a group that saw the photo and the tattoo, and they just, it was so unique to them. This group was trying to help children who had been separated from their birth families or children who had been lost, and they'd been trying to reunite them with their birth families. So they shared my picture out, and within 3 hours, my brother's friend saw the photo because he recognized the tattoo. So I literally found my birth family in just like 3 months of really starting to do a serious search, which for those who might not be as familiar with adoption searches, that's incredibly fast.
Now, you might be getting to this part of the story.
Yeah,
If you are, I'm stealing your thunder.
that's
So just
okay.
tell me. But can you rewind and talk a little bit about how you got that tattoo? Because I remember that was a very integral part of the story. What happened? I remember the whole entire story, what you presented. I'm actually getting kind of emotional just talking about
Yeah.
it. So can you talk a little bit about that? Or maybe you're going to get there.
The thing that happens when you find your birth family is you start to have all of these puzzle pieces come together. And it's because up until then, I was literally a blank slate. I had no idea how they got there. All they know is I came to the orphanage with the tattoo on my arm. So there was a big assumption that it was probably put there because of my birth family that wanted to reunite with me someday. So what I found out is that, so remember, I was about 2 years old at the time when
Right.
I was separated from my family. And I found out that I actually have 2 older brothers that I never knew about, and that my birth father had become injured. He was a laborer, and once he was injured, he just couldn't provide for the family anymore. He was the oldest of 6 kids, so his younger siblings were helping to raise us. But in the 1970s, Korea was in that area of Korea, which was south of Seoul, a very agrarian area, very poor. And so he just couldn't provide for us anymore. And my birth mother had left the family earlier, shortly, basically right after I was born.
Mm.
And so I think he was in the situation of desperation of, I have to do something for my children, send them to the welfare services, but I don't want to lose them, right? So if you're a parent in that situation, what do you do? And he chose to take my brothers and I. We went to a well near the home, and he literally gave us our tattoos. And back then that was a needle, thread, ink. Like he was literally giving us our tattoos himself. And it turns out that my 2 brothers have the same tattoo on their arms as well. And then a week before I went to Korea, I found out my father had also given himself the very same tattoo on his own arm.
Wow. Interesting. And after that, presumably he took you to an orphanage and you were separated from your brothers, right?
Well, yeah, again, those puzzle pieces you don't fully understand. We were all sent to children welfare services, and someone, I assume a social worker, actually took me and sent me to a separate orphanage. So my brothers actually didn't know where I had gone.
Wow.
And so my grandmother, because my father couldn't walk, my grandmother would visit children welfare services. So she would keep, she wanted to keep up on what was that, make sure we were okay. And she came to visit us one day, and she came home and she told the family that I had been adopted out, sent to a different orphanage. And that's how they found out that I was adopted. They didn't have the choice. He had to give up his parental rights. And at that point, the state could decide what they wanted to do with me or any of us. I think because I was the youngest, and they did change my age to make me seem younger. So they actually put my birthday 7 months younger than I really was. And, back then, I actually was adopted out at kind of a peak of adoptions. And so I think that social workers were looking for children to be adopted outside of the country.
Wow. And so fast forward to the crux of this story, which is you decided to find someone, saw the picture on social media. You were off and running, and you were going off to Korea, 3 months later? Was it a few months later? Or how long did it take you?
Just a few months later. There's kind of a funny backstory. So, and I didn't share this, by the way, at the ZAC conference.
Yeah. Ooh, we got new details. All right, give it to me.
Yeah, I have shared it with a few people, but even though we have matching tattoos, right? You take the picture side by side, you see my brother's tattoo as an adult, which looks very different than my scar and my picture on my arm. I just kind of stared at it for a very long time. I'm a lawyer by training. And so I asked, can we get a DNA test?
Yeah.
Because, there's
I want to make sure.
Yeah, it's just hard to explain. I think when you're adopted, it's sort of like you're still in this moment of piecing it all together in your brain, and it's not completely gelling. So you just want to make sure. So they were happy to do a DNA test. We did a DNA test. And because I'm a woman, my brothers are men, and my father had passed away 10 years ago. And so there wasn't a parent that was alive to be able to do a DNA match. So we did the DNA test, which was a hair sample, mailed it back to Korea, and it came back inconclusive. And we're like, oh, what does that mean?
Right.
Well, what that means is if they do a maternal DNA test, which they have to because I'm a woman, it means that you can't determine anything with regard to the father, but it means you do not have the same mother.
Okay.
So my brothers were scratching their heads saying why wouldn't we have the same mother?
Right.
So it turns out that there was 2 wives. My older brothers were the children of the first wife. Then she left. And then my dad remarried with my birth mother, and then she left. So they actually never knew that their whole life. And so, it is interesting that there's these things that even they were learning for the first time. So it was this awkward moment of, because I don't speak Korean, right? It was an awkward moment of, I wonder what they think about that. And then they were over in Korea wondering, I wonder what she thinks about that. Is she still going to accept us? So we're both on the opposite sides of the world, wondering if we're going to accept each other. And finally, I just sent a message and said, look, I accept you. I understand if you don't want to meet me. I would love to meet you, but I'm not bothered by this. Because it's like I live in America. We have reality TV in America. This is not for me something hugely dramatic that needs to stop a relationship from happening. So. And they said, whoa, phew, we're so glad because we didn't really care that much either. And we just want to meet you. We think you're our sister. And I have to say, Mario, from the moment we met each other, it was, in person, they just treated me like a sister. And I was part of the family. And I was that lost part of the family that they had been worrying about for their whole life because they remembered me. They were older. My brother was 8 years old when the family was separated. And so they have these memories, right? That I don't. For them to be able to literally take the weight off of their shoulders, the worry, the responsibility of my father always wanted to find me. And, the brothers weren't able to do that. So you can imagine, the weight that just lifted off their shoulders to meet me and know that I'm okay.
Wow. I'm an easy guy to get choked up on, but I couldn't even imagine what that would be like of remembering somebody that I knew that I was my brother or sister, and then not knowing, poof, in a day, they're gone. And then trying to remember what happened to this person and not know how to find them. So it's very interesting. Now, this whole story is what inspired you in this iteration, from lawyer to, from patent attorney to all these other degrees that you have, to eventually finding your, what I would call your home, and driving towards this concept of inclusion and diversity. Like, how did this transition? Tell me where this went to, and what does that mean for leaders today? And how can we start taking some of this concept of this story of what you just described, which was what I would call a happy ending. And in some cases, some people don't have a happy ending, right? In that, how did this catapult you to this new chapter or phase in your life over the last however many years it's been that you've been focused on this?
That is a great question. The way I would describe it is that I have always cared about diversity and inclusion because it's directly impacted my professional career. But then I think the personal journey of my own identity has now sort of fully come full circle to connect with my professional career, if that makes sense. Like, I always kept it separate, right? I'm a lawyer. I'm not a woman. I'm not, right? I'm a lawyer first. And now what my journey has allowed me to do is fully embrace and accept all the parts that I am, all of who I am, including all the flawed parts of myself, right? That the human part of me, which I struggled with things like perfectionism, control issues, and things like that, some of which does stem from, having some childhood trauma early on.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
But I think where it connects with diversity and inclusion is, I think, if we recognize a lot more of the multicultural aspects of the way the world really works now, and if we sort of pull our heads out of the sand and really recognize people in our workplaces want to be accepted for all of who they are. They don't want to just be seen as a job or just be seen as, an asset that they bring to the organization, that they are a whole human being that has a lot of perspective to give. And I would say I'm at a point in my career where my personal journey has finally connected with my career journey, and I understand how they connect together and actually enrich the work that I'm able to do. And I can fully empathize more now, I think, than I could have 20 years ago, why people just want to be seen as their whole selves at work. I have some specific strong thoughts around the role of diversity within an organization, but I do think that if we understand that people have these interesting, just rich life perspectives to bring to the table, that is huge business value right there.
Yeah.
And if we forget that personal part of what people are bringing to the table, we're actually losing out from a leadership perspective.
Yeah. Your background and story, unless you talked about it, nobody would really know, right? But it shapes you, and it shapes your thought. It shapes your actions. It shapes what you might do, whether you're a lawyer or whether you're the CEO of InclusionPro or whether it shapes these little small things and how you operate and how you work. I'll share with you a little bit about my background and how it shaped me. And there was, as an example, one thing that shaped the rest of my life when I got my acceptance into, in this case, Cal Berkeley, UC Berkeley. I didn't have a whole lot of money to apply for many colleges. In fact, I only had $41. And back then, when I was going to college, you had to pay $40 per application to submit it out to the UC system. And I only had enough money for one college, and it was all or nothing. That was what my family had to contribute. That's what I was able to work for, to be able to save, to be able to apply for college, because I didn't come from a very wealthy background at all.
Yeah.
And so it was an all or nothing. I remember when I got accepted to UC Berkeley, which was like the creme de la creme of schools, right? It's one of the most well-known, prestigious UC colleges in California. Everybody knows Cal Bears. And I remember one thing that happened when I got accepted and I started telling everybody else that impacted and shaped the rest of my life to this very day. And I'll tell that story as soon as we return from this message from our program sponsor. Every sales rep executes a cadence when they reach out via email, phone, or social media to initiate a conversation with a potential prospect. The art of a cadence is determined based on a myriad of factors, fueled primarily by a sales rep's intuition regarding the company and contact that's being pursued. However, there are a lot of questions that aren't always clear when initiating a conversation and creating a successful cadence. Zant has authored the definitive guide to sales cadence. This ebook answers questions such as, how many times should the rep attempt to contact? How long should the rep wait between attempts? What methods are most effective, and more. Download your free copy of Definitive Guide to Sales Cadence at salescadenceguide.com. That's salescadenceguide.com. And now back to our program. So you remember I said there was this one thing, and there was another gentleman. I know his name, first and last. I know exactly what he looks like because it impacted me. And that was when I got accepted and he didn't, which was the school of his choice, right? We were on the same college track. I was a college, I think I graduated with a 3.92. I was, all of the honors AP classes. I was, doing everything, football, Letterman, all that, varsity, all the clubs, everything you can think of. And we were standing in a crowd and he was so upset that he didn't get in and I did. And by the way, he was of Caucasian descent with red hair. And he said, the only reason why, in front of a group, to me, that you got in to Cal Berkeley and I didn't was because of affirmative action. Now, back then, you may remember that colleges were really looking for diversified folks into their college program. And if you were of Latino descent or of any ethnic minority, like they were always looking to try to bring those individuals into the program. My SAT scores, by the way, were 990 in comparison to his 1400. Just as an FYI, he was a 3.99, GPA. I was a 3.92. He played tennis. I played football. Right? So like all things being equal, he definitely had a better application than me from just a pure SAT. When he said that to me, it was a moment in time that I remember looking at him and I was taken aback thinking like, I cannot believe, first of all, you would say that in front of all these people. And I had one response and my response was, all I can say is I got in and you didn't. That was it. And I turned around, I about faced, and everybody was like, oh, right? Like, oh, like all the kids would do. I walked away and it shaped me for the rest of my life because basically what that meant is I didn't deserve to have a seat at the table. And now from that moment on, I had everything to prove to everybody else who wondered whether or not I got in as a result of affirmative action. And you know what? I probably did. And that shaped me to this very day. And so even when I started Vengreso as an example, as a leader, I was very committed to a mission. When I brought on all of our founders and I started pitching, I was very much looking for a diversified minority-owned business. I wanted 50% of our company to be minority-owned business. And in fact, that's exactly what we got. So if you look at like myself and Bernie Borges, our CMO, he's of Cuban descent and I'm of Latino descent, along with Filipino and also Caucasian descent as well. But if you look at the two of us and then now add a woman to our executive board, we've got 3 out of our 4 folks that are essentially of a minority ethnic background. And then of course, I wanted to further diversify that thought process in making sure that we had the boomers. And so of course, Kurt Shaver represents that boomer status right there. But if you look at what we did at Vengreso, and I just want to just kind of transition into leaders, sales leaders that are listening in about what do I do, right? These small things shaped my future. And still today, I always feel like, and this is obviously a personal issue, I probably need to go to counseling for this, but I always feel like I have to prove that I deserve the seat that I'm at. Everything I have to prove it. And there's nobody even, probably people who are watching, they don't even look at me and say that you have to prove it. They don't. It's me. It's all me. That's what I'm saying. I have to go to counseling, I'm sure. But if you look at what we've done in Vengreso, like 44% of our organization are women. 30% are Latino descent. 20% of our team is of Asian descent. 10% is of Black descent. And then we've got 13.3% in the boomer category. 33.3% are of Gen X and 53.3 are of millennial descent, or not descent, age.
Yes.
And so we've like created this environment because I'll tell you what I'm sick of, Sarah. Here's what I'm sick of. Here's what I'm tired. Here's what I don't want to see. I'm tired of going to About Us pages on websites. And no knock, no offense, but I'm tired of seeing the all-white male leadership team. And you got, oh, by the way, the token woman who's in HR and the token Asian guy who is usually in finance.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm tired of that. How do we commit to change? What do we do differently? And feel free to comment on any part of my story. Like, you're talking to leaders every single day. What do we do?
Thank you for sharing your story. I think that it's important to share those stories, especially when you've reached a leadership role like you have, Mario. And, for example, myself, I don't have anything to prove anymore, right? I've reached where I want to reach, and, it's fine. If you don't want to work with me, there's hundreds, thousands of other people that will, so it's fine. I have lots of opportunity now. So you're at a great position where you can share those stories. And I think it is upon leaders to share those stories so that they understand what we felt back then was real, right? That emotional burden of having to do and prove ourselves, where let's be real and honest about it. And by the way, we don't have to soften anything and say, gosh, no offense intended. No, we don't have to do that anymore. We can say, let's be honest. A lot of white men get jobs without being qualified, right? So and it happens all the time, and it's fine. It is what it is. So it's fine if a person of color gets a job without being fully qualified. It's fine if a woman, because what you're really doing is you're hiring based on potential.
Yeah.
When I was in law, you'd never hire a young law grad and think that person's an amazing attorney. No, they're going to spend years perfecting the craft. I've hired that person on potential only. That's the only thing I've hired you for.
Yeah.
Not because you're amazing and awesome.
I love that. I love what you just said. I love it. I love what you
we
just
just
said.
gotta be real about it, right?
That's raw, real right there. And it is
Yeah, it's fine.
exactly, if you look at like even our brand new sales team that we just brought on board, I personally, as CEO of Vengreso, invested 4 weeks into their training, almost nonstop, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I very specifically targeted Latino sales people. Now, it could have been women, it could have been men. That's all I wanted on the team. I wanted that. I was very targeted. And I look at our sales team today, and they're doing such an amazing job. And it was because of exactly what you just said. I said, you've got the potential. You've got it all to be this amazing individual. And it reminds me so much of my younger self, of where you could be. You just need the forum, right? The box. You just need that shaping, that coaching, that mentoring. And I want to get you to wherever it is you want to get to. And yes, I guess it is okay to tell people, I hired you because of your potential. I love that. That's what leaders need to hear.
Look, when an executive gets their first executive job, it's not because they are an amazing executive, right? I mean, that is just the reality of how people build careers. And for so long, we've been telling ourselves these stories of meritocracy and what that looks like. And I think if we're just real and honest about how jobs really get filled, I think we can just cut ourselves some slack and say, then why not just use that same behavior, but open up those opportunities for other people who, by the way, have never been executives before, but are totally willing to step up to the plate and learn what it needs to take to get the job done, which is what any other white male executive has done. That's the opportunity that they've been given. And so, opening up those opportunities wider. Now, I do want to say from a leadership standpoint, one of the ways I've been encouraging people to think about this, because you think about, like, a lot of people kind of come with this, well, I should be doing this because it's the right thing to do mindset. And I look at them and I think, well, it's always been the right thing to do, but we're not doing it.
Right.
So how do we help ourselves overcome whatever is that mental barrier? And one of the things I've been helping leaders on is called inclusion by design. The story that you described, Mario, of how you built your company and you had a lot of intention around it, and you had certain skills and perspectives that were critical, that you wanted to be part of your organization and the fabric of the culture. Leaders can very much intentionally design for an inclusive culture. And I think they don't realize that I, as a white man, could choose to intentionally structure and design an organization for inclusion. The way to get inclusive outcomes, that diversity of thought that you are speaking of, is to intentionally design for it. Be very strategic about how am I going to do that and get that. Now, the thing that goes with that, though, is to be very mindful of our blind spots. So I'll give you an example. I was working at a company, and the sales team, they had about 60 people on the sales team, mostly white men. I was building a department on the product side, and I had the most diverse team. And it's not, and I would say I didn't as intentionally design it as you did, but look, I just was hiring for skills, right? I
Sure.
had from a multicultural perspective, LGBTQ, religious diversity, international diversity. I had the most diverse team. And the sales leaders would say, Sara, how did you build such a diverse team?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's because I'm really good at looking for the right skill set. Now, I'll give you an example of that. I interviewed a woman. She was Native American. And I said, look, I don't actually see a role for you right now on my product team, but I think you would be an amazing member of the sales team. I think that you could build out a whole Native American channel for them in education. So I sent her over to an executive in the sales department. And I followed up with them. I said, what did you think about her? Did you interview her? He goes, yeah, but I didn't really hear sales coming out of her mouth. And I thought, wow, what a missed opportunity. I didn't hear sales, not in the traditional white man version that was kind of rampant in that company, but I saw a set of skills that she understood the Native American community, was very steeped in policy, very much understood education and knew how to connect all those dots together. And that's the kind of trust that you needed to have to be able to build a sales channel to penetrate that particular channel. But this white male executive completely missed that because he didn't hear what he had been accustomed to hearing when it came to who he thought would be a good salesperson, which explains why all the salespeople were white men. So that's an example of we've got to if we say, oh, I want to be really intentional about this, fantastic. People like me can help you do that. But you have to be willing to check in and challenge your own blind spots, to challenge your own bias of who you think a good salesperson is. Because if all you've seen is white men as salespeople, you've probably missed an opportunity to see, for example, the way Sara Jones does sales. And by the way, I've generated millions and millions of dollars for companies, right? But my sales approach and the way I speak to people or build relationships might be different, right? It might be different than Mario's way of building and bringing in those sales teams. I had a company that was all women sales, right? The customer was HR. They loved these sales professionals, right? But if you in your professional experience have not had that exposure, then it behooves you to check in with those biases, right? And maybe find ways to get more exposure, to learn different perspectives and different personalities or the different ways that people can do sales and be highly, highly effective doing it. I would never call myself a salesperson, but I can bring in the money. So, what is it ultimately that you want as a sales leader?
Yeah. This is something we go back to. We talk about this being very intentional, right? And one of the big challenges that I see, especially in big Fortune 100s, the bigger the company, the more cautious and conservative the HR department becomes for various reasons. One, because you can be sued for reverse discrimination, and everybody's always afraid of having a lawsuit. But when I sat in this seat in a leadership position in a Fortune 100, I was in the position of hiring. And so every once in a while, when we had an open position, I would get an email from human resources and it would say, this position has been identified as a diverse position. Please look for opportunities to be able to fill this particular position with a diversified candidate. And so I'd say, tell me exactly what this means. Am I looking for African American? Am I looking for Latino? Am I looking for LGBTQ? What am I looking for, right? Tell me what I'm looking for. And HR would always come back with, well, we want you to find the best candidate. Well, obviously, duh. Like, give me something more. So I was like, what are we short of? Native American, Indian, male, woman? Tell me what. Well, no, always look for just the best candidate. Well, whatever source comes in, just look for the best candidate and hire to the best. No, you just got through sending me an email saying this position has been identified as one that should be a diverse position. Tell me, what are we short on, and what can I help to make a contribution back to the company? And the organization would never do it. They weren't ballsy enough to go out and say, we're looking for 25, 50, 100 African-American, Black, women, Latin, whatever it is. They didn't do that. And that's what bugs me. And so from my perspective, look, if your company, this is my perspective, if your company is not ballsy enough and too conservative to be able to say that, then I believe that you should make in your own mind, in your own decision, you know what, I'm going to look for this. This is what I'm looking for. Because every manager, whether you're a manager, director, vice president, CEO, whatever, you know what the makeup looks like. If you look around the boardroom, you look around your team meeting, and you see Caucasian, 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 male, 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 one female, male, 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 you have a problem. So be committed to change is what I would say. And it's not that hard to do. I mean, all you have to do is look at the person's LinkedIn profile and say, I want to talk to them, or I don't, right?
Exactly. So you hit on two super critical points. One, let's talk about the HR department. If you're getting an email like that from the HR department, what's really happening is in your organization, the HR department has been delegated the role of driving diversity. They are not quite sure how to make that happen. And so they think that little reminder, that little nudge is what's going to get you as a sales leader to diversify your network. But that doesn't happen, right? Because,
Right.
I mean, look, Mario, you're probably going to read that and actually think about it. Most sales leaders aren't going to, but the HR person can say, yeah, but I sent an email.
Yeah, exactly right.
And if I don't have the diversity numbers, it's not my fault. I ask everybody to look and to be watchful for it. So that's a signal of an organization that has done what I call delegated the role of diversity and inclusion to a single focal point. It's
Right.
highly ineffective, right? So there's some other things that have to happen in terms of just aligning that entire organizational structure. But the second super critical point that you brought up is that none of us should need an email from an HR person asking us to find interesting, broad, diverse talent. We shouldn't need that reminder. We're grown-ups. We know that our teams benefit from having diverse perspectives. So it's actually on us. And I'm a big believer that your executive team needs to be leading out on this. But look, in every single role I've been in, and probably you as well, Mario, you can influence your sphere of influence, right?
Yeah.
That's what you can control. So like I said, at that one company where I was on the product team and not on the sales team, I was hiring a diverse team. I didn't need anybody to tell me to do that. It just naturally happened because I have a broader way of thinking about skill set. And that's on each of us from a leadership standpoint. We can choose to do that ourselves. If you're white male, you can do that. You don't need someone to tell you to broaden and diversify your own personal network so that you have a broader talent base to choose from. You certainly don't need HR to do it. But the reason why HR is sending that email is so that they can say, yeah, but I reminded everyone to do that, right? And I understand why it infuriates you as well.
And it's just one of those things where it's like, man, don't walk the line, like step over, like you're either step over into this side and make it happen, because it's not very difficult to be able to be hyper targeted. And I think, this goes out to a shout out to my fellow leaders in the organization, Kurt Shaver, Bernie Borges, and Vivica. At no point in time has anyone ever even questioned the thought of hiring from the Philippines, hiring from Latin America, hiring from, a diversified portfolio. Even our AI bot is African-American, okay? Like her profile.
Awesome.
So at no point did anybody ever do that. And that's the type of leader that I want on the team. And I want those stories. I want the Sara Jones stories, right? Because I'm going to imagine, Sara, that growing up as probably Korean in Utah you were probably a little bit of a fish out of water.
Oh, definitely. Totally. And yeah, continue.
I was gonna say, and that experience is what creates a powerful team of being able to understand collective thought, understand how to better penetrate markets. That's what I think makes a big difference and is what is needed in the next phase of business and life.
Yeah, and I think it has shaped, who I am. I think there's definitely the birth reunification, or meeting my birth family piece of my life that was important. But look, my adoption has shaped who I am and how I see the world. I've always sat on this sort of bridge between white and Asian, right? Not fully accepted by either. And so I've always sort of lived at the intersections. And if I look back on the last, 40 years of my life, even in high school, how I made friends, the circles, I would just sort of kind of hop from group to group, never really being a part of a, closed group, if that makes sense. I've always sort of been on the fringes of all of them. But what's interesting, and again, there's these blessings in disguise that always happen. I actually learned how to be a really great connector, right? Because I don't feel like I have to stick with a certain group. I am able to go from different groups to different groups, build friendships and relationships, and know how to connect them together. So it's a skill set that, for better or for worse, life put me in a certain position, but it taught me a really wonderful set of skills that I've been able to benefit from in being able to learn how to navigate different groups and different, business networking opportunities. And also, I tell people all the time, broaden your perspective, meet new people, and for some people that's really hard to do. Yeah. I am fortunate that it comes easily to me because I've sort of been forced out of that comfort zone from a very, very early age, but there's a lot to be learned by being pushed out of your comfort zone.
And I'll tell this last story because we're way up on time here. We've gone over it. This has been a great, fabulous conversation. But
thank you.
If we think through just about impact, I'll tell a story, and hopefully I'll get through this without getting emotional, because it gets me super emotional about this. But my son Malachi, he's 6 years old, and he was in pre-K last year. We live in a fairly affluent area of Walnut Creek area. And for the most part, everybody that was at his school was of, Caucasian descent, maybe some Asian descent as well, but mostly everybody was based upon the area as of that background. And he was 5 years old. And one day he came home and he asked us whether or not he could change his skin color. Now, my son, if you look at both my boys, they look almost exactly alike, but one took the Korean and white color tone and one took the black and Mexican color tone, right? Of my wife and I. We needed to understand, like, why would you want to do that? Your skin is beautiful. What are you talking about? It's like this chocolate milk chocolate skin. Like, I wish I had it. And it was because the boys at school were telling him that he had a poop colored skin. So this is about to get emotional. The moment that you hear that, you just want to go and kick the little kid in the head. Of course I did it. Of course I did it. And in most cases, these are young kids that are 5 years old. They really don't understand what that means, right? And maybe they heard it at home. I don't know. I can't say that they did. I can't say that they didn't. But oftentimes they don't understand what that means. And the kids say the darndest thing, right? But what it led him to really start to grow and develop at an early age was a sense of color. And he had never thought about color beforehand, and questioned whether or not he was good enough because of his skin color. Of course, I share lots of pictures of my boys on LinkedIn. And if you look at any one of the two of them, you'll think that they're extremely handsome. And I think they are as well. They take after their mom. She's beautiful. But what it allowed us to do is to help shape him. And we started watching, if you remember the movie, Remember the Titans, where with Denzel Washington and the football team where white and black came together. And that is one of our all-time favorite movies as a family. And he's now 6 years old. And this like 10th time that we finally watched it, he kept asking questions and wanting to understand, like, what does that mean when they said that? Why did they do this? What happened? And now it's allowed us to shape him. But that one experience of whether or not he's good enough absolutely shape him for the rest of his life. And that's the type of thing that I think leaders need to be thinking about and wanting and desiring. What's that one thing that has shaped your life, or many things that have shaped your life, that I can use to my advantage, that I can leverage to be able to help our business grow because you bring something to the table that nobody else does. And it doesn't have to be skin color. It could be maybe you're of Caucasian descent, but you went through an adoption situation, right? And you have a totally different perspective on life. Maybe you were Caucasian and you were poor, just like my story. Take my story of what I told you about college and put yourself in white skin. Okay, cool, right? Or put yourself in any diversified category you want. Doesn't matter. That's what you're looking for in terms of diversity and inclusion. And my shout out goes out to our Vengreso founders for really allowing me to push an agenda, and for being supportive, and for wanting to do the same exact thing because of what you said. It was the right thing to do, right? It just have to look around and it's the right thing to do. Sarah, we've gone way over our time, and it's been a fabulous conversation. I love having you on the show. Where can people find out more information about either InclusionPro or what you do to help leadership teams, really think about diversity and inclusion?
So they are welcome to follow me on InclusionPro. That's all one word. Also, I'm on social media regularly: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Easiest way to find me is to add my maiden name, Danzy, D-A-N as in Nancy, S-I-E, Sara Danzy Jones. I pop up on all three platforms that way, and love, anybody who wants to follow me, my work, and the conversations that were happening. And Mara, thank you for sharing your story. I want to just say that I appreciate you getting personal, because I think that's what's been missing, I think, a lot from our workplace relationships. When we can get personal, we build empathy for each other, right? If your son was able to share how that hurt, how he felt when he heard that, or why did you say that, or that hurt my feelings and I don't understand. Like, that stuff happens all the time, but we just need to learn how to tap into empathy. We can all understand disappointment, loss, anger, fear. We can all just understand those things. And if we can share those and really understand how to connect, we can actually lead to more productive relationships, right? So I really think that the empathy, understanding is what helps us work better as teams. So I appreciate you bringing that personal perspective. I think it's something that leaders should incorporate more into their leadership style that actually helps us connect as humans.
Well, I want to thank you for joining the Modern Selling Podcast. It's been a very important topic, and one that I'm very passionate about and near and dear to my heart. And we'll make sure we put your website link along with all of your social media handles inside of the show notes for those listening in. You didn't capture it. Don't worry. Just go to the show notes on the Modern Selling Podcast, and you'll be able to find Sara. I encourage you, if you're thinking about this, you see it's a problem, it's a problem, don't look the other way. Now you can make change. And folks like Sara are out there helping leaders to be able to address these issues and think more deeply about how to make change. So I have no relation whatsoever. I don't make a single dollar out of this whatsoever by saying, pick up the phone and call Sara to see if you can get some help, but pick up the phone and call Sara. That's what I'm saying. And Sara, thanks again for joining me on the show here. And for all of you listening in, don't turn that dial. Do not turn the dial, because we got one more important message for you. And those of you that are watching on Facebook Live, thank you so much for joining in on, again, this episode of the Modern Selling Podcast. And Sara, say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Mario. Good luck with everything. And thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Modern Selling Podcast. Please do me a huge favor and give the Modern Selling Podcast a rating and review on iTunes. I would appreciate it. Also, if you want to easily find our show, just go to themodernsellingpodcast.com. Hey, since you'll be on our site, be sure to check out our Modern Marketing Engine podcast, hosted by my co-founder and CMO, Bernie Borges. Thanks for listening in, and until the next episode, good selling.